The ship was dying. The massive naval vessel groaned under the weight of its own silence, an impossible quiet for a steel giant that once roared across oceans. Now, its heart, the great engine buried deep within its metallic core, lay still. The once vibrant hum that fueled the lives of hundreds aboard had turned to a suffocating stillness, pressing against every chest, filling every corridor with dread. Men moved hurriedly, whispering in voices that trembled with defeat. Sweat glistened on brows. Tools clattered against the floor, and somewhere above, the smell of burnt oil drifted through the stale air like a ghost of failure. The Admiral stood in the control room, staring at the unmoving engine indicators that flickered with stubborn defiance. His face was calm, deceptively calm, but inside him brewed a storm of restrained fury. The Navy had sent its best, engineers, specialists, even civilian experts, all flown in, all boasting unmatched skill, yet the ship remained dead in the water, a floating monument to human arrogance. Every hour of stillness meant millions lost, a mission compromised, and a reputation stained beyond repair. "Admiral," one of the engineers whispered, voice quivering, "we've tried everything. The main turbine won't respond to any reboot sequence. It's beyond repair, beyond repair." The words sank like lead into the Admiral's chest. He looked out through the glass, past the grey horizon where the ocean met the sky. Vast, indifferent, eternal. For the first time in years he felt small, powerless, and yet, beneath that helplessness, something stirred. A memory, sharp as lightning. A woman's voice, calm, assured, precise. She had once walked these decks beside him, not in this life of command, but in the chaos of creation, when the ship was just an idea, a tangle of blueprints and dreams. She'd known its heart better than anyone. She had given this vessel its pulse. And then, quietly, she'd vanished from the Navy's world, replaced by louder, prouder men. He could almost hear her now. "A ship isn't just a machine," she had once said. "It's a rhythm of lives. When it stops, you don't fix the metal. You find where the rhythm broke." The Admiral exhaled. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. He turned toward his men, voice low but unshakable. "Get me Dr. Elena Voss." The room stilled. The name carried weight, a mix of awe and discomfort. Some of the younger officers exchanged uncertain glances. They had heard stories. The woman who once saved a fleet with a single modification, and was later forced out after questioning the chain of command. A silence followed. Then a quiet murmur, "Sir, she's not been with the Navy for years." "I'm aware," the Admiral said. His voice was steel again. "Find her anyway." Outside, the sky darkened. The sea began to swell. The storm was coming, and with it, something far older than wind or water. The reckoning of forgotten brilliance. Elena Voss had left that world behind. The clang of metal, the smell of diesel, the echo of orders barked down narrow hallways. All of it haunted her even in peace. She now lived on the edge of a quiet harbor town, where gulls cried over calm waters, and the most complex machine she handled was an old fishing boat engine that coughed like a dying dog. She liked it that way. Life had become simple, predictable, dull, perhaps, but hers. So when the black car appeared on the dirt road, slicing through the morning mist, her heart sank before she even saw who stepped out. The officer in formal uniform handed her a sealed document. "Dr. Voss, the Admiral, requests your immediate assistance aboard the Erebus." "It's a matter of national priority," she laughed softly. Not with amusement, but disbelief. After all these years, he remembers I exist. But as she read the emergency summary, engine failure, total system collapse, mission halted, her fingers tightened around the paper, the Erebus. Her ship, somewhere in her chest, that old fire, the one she had buried under years of resentment and silence, flickered back to life. She looked at the horizon where the sea met the dawn. "Tell the Admiral," she said quietly, "I'll come." The officer nodded and saluted. The car's door closed with a soft thud, and as the engine faded into the distance, Elena stood motionless for a long moment. The wind caught her hair, carrying with it the distant scent of salt and iron, the smell of her past calling her home. As she packed her tools that evening, her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from memory. The last time she stood before the Admiral, she had walked away in anger, her career collapsing in the echo of a slammed door. Now she would return, not as a subordinate, not as a forgotten engineer, but as the only one who could save what everyone else had failed to understand. The ship's lights gleamed in the distance, like a wounded beast awaiting its healer. And as the first raindrops began to fall, Elena knew this was not just a call to duty. It was a reckoning. The storm hit before dawn. Waves rose like dark mountains crashing against the hull of the Erebus, as if the sea itself wanted to test her resolve before allowing salvation. The ship groaned under the assault, its engines lifeless, its crews scrambling to keep systems from total collapse. Elena arrived amidst the chaos. Her hair whipped across her face as she stepped onto the deck, rain soaking her coat. The moment she set foot on the steel, she felt it. The silence beneath the storm, the kind that didn't belong to weather, but to machines holding their breath. The Admiral was waiting for her, his uniform damp but posture unbroken. Their eyes met across the storm's fury, two histories colliding in a single glance. "Dr. Voss," he said simply. "Admiral," no handshake, no smile, just the unspoken recognition of a wound neither had healed. He led her to the control chamber where exhausted engineers hovered over dead monitors. The air was thick with failure. She scanned the room once, faces pale, tools scattered, the scent of burnt circuits, then turned toward the central display. "When did the failure begin?" she asked, voice calm, analytical. 36 hours ago," the Admiral replied. "We've replaced every core component. Nothing holds." She crouched beside the main interface, fingers tracing the metal surface as though reading Braille. "You replaced them," she murmured. "Then you buried the problem deeper." The engineers stiffened. The Admiral's jaw tightened. "Explain," he said. She turned to him, her gaze steady. "You can't fix a pulse by replacing the heart if the brain's forgotten how to beat." Her words hung in the air, cryptic, almost poetic, but loaded with meaning. She stood and began to move slowly, methodically, through the engine room. Her hand brushed against panels, cables, valves, each touch awakening fragments of memory. She had designed these pathways, every conduit and failsafe. But something was off. "The ship's not responding because someone rewired its logic," she said finally, kneeling before a console. "You changed her language." One of the younger engineers scoffed quietly. "With all due respect, ma'am, we upgraded to a more modern protocol. The old system was obsolete." Elena's head turned sharply, eyes cold. "Obsolete?" She pressed a switch, revealing a string of corrupted code. "You stripped away its instinct. This ship was built to think, not just function. You turned her into a machine that doesn't know itself anymore." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "Can you fix it?" She paused, studying him. "If she still remembers me, yes." Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of auxiliary power flickering back to life for a brief second. Like a heartbeat testing its return, the storm raged outside, but inside the Erebus, it was the silence that hurt the most. That awful, hollow kind of silence that settles in places that were never meant to be quiet. Engine rooms, battledecks, hearts. Elena stood at the center of it, eyes closed, palms resting on the cold steel casing of the engine. She could feel the faint vibration of auxiliary currents running through the hull, a whisper of life. A ship always had a rhythm, and though this one was faint, it was there, trembling under her fingertips like a frightened animal waiting to be soothed. For hours, she said nothing. The crew watched her, half in awe, half in confusion. She moved with an intimacy that unnerved them, tracing wires, touching valves, pausing as if listening to something only she could hear. She's talking," she murmured under her breath. "You just stopped listening." Behind her, the Admiral stood motionless. He wanted to speak, to ask, to demand, to command, but something in her composure silenced even him. He remembered that look from years ago, when she stood before a panel of senior officers, warning them of a flaw in the propulsion sequence. They had laughed then, until the test run nearly tore the ship apart. Now, as she worked, that same quiet defiance filled the room again. At last she opened her eyes. "Who modified the primary coolant relay?" she asked. One of the senior engineers hesitated, glancing nervously at the Admiral. "That would be me, ma'am. I followed the updated schematics." Eleanor's voice was steady, but her words cut deep. "You rerouted the coolant line to a synthetic valve that can't handle recursive pressure feedback. You've been forcing her lungs to breathe against themselves." The man's face paled. "I didn't know." "No," she interrupted softly. "You didn't." She looked at him not in anger but in pity. "Because you treated her like a machine, not like a living design." Her hands began to move faster now. Not frantic but precise. Tools clinked. Wires shifted, the faint hum grew steadier. The room seemed to breathe again. The Admiral stepped closer. "You built this ship as if it had a soul." She didn't look up. "It does. You all just stopped believing in it." He wanted to argue, to remind her that belief had no place in engineering. But as he watched the steady return of light on the control panels, the rhythm of power pulsing back into the grid, even he felt it, that strange living heartbeat of the Erebus stirring from slumber. Then, suddenly, a warning light flashed crimson. Systems began shutting down one by one. The hum faltered, then died again. Elena froze, her breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered. The Admiral's calm voice broke through the confusion. "What happened?" She leaned over the console, scanning reading. "Something's feeding off the backup line, like a loop redirecting power away from the main reactor." A younger officer frowned. "A virus?" Elena's gaze darkened. "No, a lockout." Her fingers flew across the manual override panel. A line of text appeared, an old encryption signature. She recognized it instantly. Her own. Years ago, when she designed the ship's AI interface, she had built in a safeguard, a hidden sequence that only she could access, a way to prevent tampering by unqualified personnel. But someone had twisted it, turning her own protection into a prison. She stepped back, realization dawning. "You used my system," she said quietly, looking at the Admiral, "and you locked her away from herself." He met her eyes without flinching. "After you left, they insisted on reprogramming her failsafe. We didn't have your access codes. Command said it was necessary." Her voice dropped raw. "You stripped her identity for control." The room felt heavier. Rain pounded against the hull like fists. Elena stared at the console. Her creation, her failure, her ghost. She won't come back willingly now. She doesn't trust the hand that silenced her. The Admiral's voice softened. "Then she might trust yours." She looked at him. The years between them hung like an ocean. Unspoken words, fractured trust, shared guilt. For a moment, neither moved. Then Elena turned away, her expression unreadable. "I'll need isolation," she said. "Full shutdown of all non-essential systems. No interference, not from anyone." The Admiral nodded. "Do what you must." When the room cleared, she stood alone. Just her and the dead machine that had once been her masterpiece. She lowered herself into the engineer's seat and placed her palms on the manual interface. "I know you're still here," she whispered. "I'm sorry for what they did to you, for leaving you with them." The screens flickered faintly, a ghost of a pulse. She smiled sadly. "You remember me, don't you? Let's find our way back." For the next several hours, she worked wordlessly, part technician, part confessor. She bypassed overrides, decrypted ancient fragments of code she herself had written long ago. The storm outside mirrored the one within her, the fight between anger and forgiveness, past and present, failure and faith. At last, she reached the core sequence. Her hands trembled as she typed the final command. "Initiate Heartline Restore, DRE VOS authorization." The ship responded with a low, rising hum, soft at first, then steady, alive. Lights flickered back on one by one, illuminating her face with pale gold. Outside, thunder roared. Inside, the Erebus breathed again. She exhaled, tears mixing with the sweat and oil on her cheeks. "Welcome back," she whispered. The door opened behind her. The Admiral entered quietly. For the first time in years, his face wasn't carved in command. It was human, almost gentle. "You did it," he said. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the screens, where the ship's systems now glowed with perfect symmetry. "No," she said softly. "We did it. Years ago, when you still believed in me, he said nothing, but his silence held regret and something more, respect. The storm outside began to fade. The ocean calmed, as if the world itself had been waiting for this reconciliation. For a moment, the Admiral stood beside her, watching the readings stabilize. You once told me a ship was more than steel and code. Elena turned to him, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the consoles. And you once told me people were replaceable. Their eyes met, old wounds and unspoken truth suspended in that quiet space. He finally said, almost to himself, I was wrong. But the story wasn't over. Because even as the Erebus came back to life, a deep warning tone echoed through the control deck. A single red alert blinked on the screen. Reactor pressure unstable. Elena's expression changed instantly. No, that's not possible. The failsafe was... Before she could finish, the ship trembled violently. Bolts rattled, lights flickered, and the hull groaned under an unseen strain. The Admiral braced himself. Report. She stared at the data streaming across the screen, numbers spiraling out of control. Something's feeding power back into the core. It's overloading itself. How much time do we have? She didn't look up. Minute. And with that, the silence shattered once more, replaced not by failure, but by the relentless urgency of one final chance to save everything they'd both ever believed in. The walls shuddered as alarms wailed through the belly of the Erebus. The once dead ship now throbbed with too much life, too much power surging through its veins. What had been a resurrection was becoming a rebellion. Elena's fingers flew across the manual controls, her eyes sharp with precision. Sweat dripped from her temple, catching in the light of the glowing consoles. Every movement was practiced instinct, the rhythm of someone who had lived inside the pulse of machines. The reactor's rejecting the stabilization code, she said. Voice clipped, steady against the chaos. It's looping itself back into override. Someone reprogrammed the core to self-feed under pressure. A failsafe turned inside out. The Admiral leaned over the terminal beside her. Can it be stopped? She didn't answer. Her silence was enough. Power readings climbed. The deck vibrated beneath their feet. The engine, the heart of the Erebus, was on the verge of tearing itself apart. The Admiral's voice broke through the chaos. If that reactor blows, the shockwave will take out half the fleet's patrol grid. Elena nodded faintly, her eyes on the readouts. Then we can't let it. She tore the access panel open, exposing a nest of copper wiring and thermal conduits. Heat poured out in waves, searing her skin. But she didn't hesitate. She reached in, her hands steady despite the burn. Dr. Voss, one of the younger engineers, shouted from the doorway. You'll fry yourself. She didn't even look up. Then I'll fry trying. The Admiral took a step forward, his instinct screaming to stop her. But something in her expression froze him. The absolute calm of someone who had already made peace with the cost. Elena's voice was low, focused as she worked. Years ago, I told your commanders the ship needed empathy built into her core, that her intelligence should feel balance, not enforce it. They called it emotional redundancy. She let out a humorless breath. They stripped it away. Now she's lost between logic and instinct. The Admiral's jaw tightened. Tell me what to do. She glanced at him, and for the first time in years, her eyes softened. Trust me. He nodded once, a silent command to the others. Clear the deck. When they were alone, Elena's movements became slower, more deliberate. She began rerouting the primary conduits manually, bypassing the corrupted feed lines one by one. The console lights flickered between red and amber, the ship fighting her every step. The Admiral stood beside her, helpless but steady. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked quietly. Her lips curved faintly. You wouldn't have listened. He couldn't argue. The truth landed like a blow, heavy, deserved. Minutes passed like heartbeats. She worked faster now, her burned hands trembling but unrelenting. The reactor's pulse grew louder, almost human, a desperate, angry thrum echoing through the steel. And then she found it, the recursive line feeding the overload loop, hidden deep beneath layers of code, buried like a secret shame. She smiled bitterly. There you are. The Admiral leaned closer. What is it, my ghost? She said softly. The system used my original access pattern to trap itself. The ship isn't just malfunctioning. It's asking me to let it go. He didn't understand, not fully, but he saw the look in her eyes, the pain of creation turning against its maker. She typed a final command, then hesitated. Her voice dropped to a whisper. If I break the loop, it'll erase the old core memory, everything she ever learned from me. It'll save the ship, but she won't remember me. The Admiral spoke gently. You gave her life once. Maybe now you give her freedom. Elena's throat tightened. She looked up at the glowing screen, her own name still encrypted in the ship's dying code. The storm outside had faded into silence. The world was holding its breath. She pressed the final key. Purge authorized. Heartline restore complete. The ship convulsed, a deep shuddering roar that rolled through the decks like thunder. The lights flared, blinding white. Then slowly the vibrations eased. The hum softened. The alarms silenced. And just like that, the Erebus lived again. A clean, steady rhythm pulsed through the hull. Calm, alive, balanced. The air filled with the low, harmonious thrum of a machine that had remembered how to breathe. Elena slumped back, breath shaking, hands blackened with soot. She smiled faintly through exhaustion. She's stable, she murmured. She's as... Her words faltered as her knees buckled. The Admiral caught her before she hit the floor. Elena, I'm fine, she whispered weakly. Just tired. He held her steady, his hand trembling for the first time. Around them, the ship glowed in quiet triumph. The danger passed. Outside the observation glass, dawn was breaking. Golden light spilled over the horizon, painting the steel decks in warmth. It was as if the ocean itself was acknowledging her victory. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Elena spoke, voice barely audible. You see, she was never broken. She was just waiting for someone to listen. The Admiral looked out at the endless sea. Maybe we all were, he turned to her. You've done more than save this ship, Elena. You reminded us what we forgot, that even the strongest steel needs a heart. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, and that hearts can't be replaced. She looked around the control deck, her creation alive once more. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Not the cold, hollow kind she'd lived with, but a quiet, complete stillness, the kind that comes when something long lost has finally been forgiven. The Admiral stood beside her, watching the sun climb higher. Command will call this a technical recovery, he said softly. But we'll know better, she laughed faintly. They always do. Then she turned to him, her eyes reflecting the rising light. Don't let them dismantle her again. Promise me that. He nodded. The promise firm. I won't. Not this time. They stood there in silence. Two people bound by the ship between them, by years of mistakes and one final redemption. As the engines purred and the horizon opened wide, Elena reached out, resting her hand gently on the console. Goodbye, old girl, she whispered. You're free now. The Erebus answered with a soft hum. Not loud, not mechanical, but something like gratitude. And in that sound, Elena Voss heard everything she'd ever needed. Forgiveness, completion, and the echo of her own heart, finally at peace. The Admiral watched her, the faintest smile touching his lips. You always were the only one who could make her listen. Elena glanced at him, eyes tired but alive. Maybe you just never listened long enough. He chuckled under his breath, a sound that felt almost foreign to him. Then, quietly, he saluted her, not as a superior, not as a commander, but as a man acknowledging the one person who had saved what no one else could. She returned the gesture with a nod, eyes glinting with both defiance and grace. Outside, the sun broke fully over the ocean, gilding the waves in molten gold. The Erebus surged forward, steady, unstoppable, alive, cutting through the calm sea like a blade of redemption. And for the first time in years, the Admiral and Elena stood side by side, not as ghosts of failure, but as keepers of a story the ocean itself would remember, of a ship reborn, a promise renewed, and a brilliant woman who taught the sea how to breathe again.